You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, before we commence our conversation on Good Friday, Sacrifice for Sustainable Peace, let's listen to this Vox Pop compiled by our correspondent, Victor Azu.
I think we need to just start to build morale, really, because this is all our fight. We have to fight all together. We are one country. We watch out for each other. Watch out for your neighbors, watch out for your friends. From there, trust me, it's one person stand up, another person will join. From there, a old tree, from there, a forest. We're strong, we're one.
We will always respect the rights of one another in this country, because I surely believe there will be no peace for mankind if mankind don't have equal rights and justice in the whole world.
To harmonize ourselves, that is making everybody understand his stand, as in we Nigeria as a country, and government should know it's their responsibility to watch whatever is going in the country. Security is the responsibility of everyone. It's not only the responsibility of security agencies. That's how some of our Nigerians thought. It's only the issue concerning the responsibility of security agencies, not Nigerians, in which there is no way you can achieve maintaining peace without the collaboration of the communals.
All right, Victor Azu compiled that Vox Pop for us. And I remember the motto of my former school, my alma mater, it says, action, not words. And I think what we actually need now is actualizing the essence of today in our lives so that we move forward. But let me quickly bring in our guests that have come to the studio right here to speak on Good Friday, Sacrifice for Sustainable Peace with us. Reverend Israel Akonji is Chairman, Christian Association of Nigeria, North Central Zone, and he's also the Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church, Garki, here in Abuja. We appreciate you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Also with us here in the studio in Abuja is Reverend Udochi Majesty Odikanwa, Senior Pastor and General Overseer of the Restoration Life Assembly International here in Abuja. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless you. Thank you.
All right, also here with us in the Abuja studios, would like to welcome Venerable Oludare Otoki, who is the Vicar of the Basilica of Grace, Anglican Communion in Gudu, Abuja. Venerable Otoki, a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Good day, viewers at home.
All right, and also here with us, but this time from our Kaduna Network Center, would like to welcome the Reverend John Joseph Hayab, Country Director of Global Peace Foundation. The Reverend Hayab, delight to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much, and good morning, fellow Nigerians, and happy Good Friday.
All right. Gentlemen, let's begin this conversation. I mean, earlier on, my colleague and I were bantering to introduce to this edition of the program. The common point often that arises on Good Friday is if Jesus Christ was crucified on a Friday like this, so what's good about a Friday when such a heinous action was taken against the Son of Man? Let's begin with the Reverend Dr. Akonji. What's good about Good Friday?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very good question. Good Friday, I think it's a beautiful program to be doing Good Friday on a Good Morning Nigeria. So two good things happening at the same time. We do really hope we'll have a double portion of God's goodness at a time like this. Now, yes, we talk about Good Friday because we are actually talking about the effects of the day. Good Friday is the day that Jesus was crucified on the cross. Actually, for Jesus, it was a painful day. It was a day of suffering. It was a day of shame. It was a day of death. For Jesus, we can even say it was really a bad day. However, for us, the result of it is that it is good, because when Jesus was being crucified on the cross, he carried on himself the sin of the entire world, to the point that at a point on the cross, he had to speak out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means that, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because at that time, Jesus was carrying the sin of the world. So it was a kind of experience that was not normal with Jesus. But then he carried it for the sake of mankind. So when on the cross he said, Father, forgive them, what he was actually saying is, Father, forgive them, but punish me. Release them, but let me take their punishment on myself. So for Jesus, it was really a painful day. But for us, that was the day that he died for us. He died in our place, substitutionary death, so that we will be forgiven. It is that forgiveness we have, the reconciliation we have with God, the big extent of his death that makes us children, that makes us justified, that make us sanctified, reconciled, saved, that makes it a really good day. So it's really comprehensive what Jesus did on the cross to give us a new life, a whole life that is different from the plans of the devil against us. He came to give victory to us by his death. That's why it's a Good Friday.
All right, Reverend Akonje, thank you. I like to also take the same question to Reverend Udochi Odekanwa, and I'm actually going to ask, when or how the word good, came to be attached to Easter, because you had the Thursday preceding the crucifixion is identified as Holy Thursday. And in other climes, you have Easter Friday, Easter Sunday, and, Easter month, that's the resurrection. So how did we come to attach good to a day, of the crucifixion?
Thank you so much for, first of all, I'm so highly elated of being here. Looking at it from a kind of a social analytical view of this Easter celebration, you are talking about good that is attached to today, because we have a master. We have a mentality that there was a personality that came for rescue. There was a personality, a leader, not just a Christian leader, a moral leader, a spiritual leader, a sociological leader, an opinion leader. A leader the Jews and the non-Jews believed in. And they believed that this personality left his ego, left all his apex personality traits, and abased himself for the nobody to be somebody. And so he could have seated in his father's throne and say, I'm not going to come. But he came, he chose to die. And because he chose to die, it was called good for the simplicity of the sacrifice. Now, why was it called good? Because without the death of Jesus, there couldn't have been Christianity. Christianity came to be because Jesus chose to die. And because he chose to die, he gave us an option of escape. Before, man was everlastingly doomed for condemnation from the first Adam, where he disappointed God. But he became the second Adam who brought an option. And so, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And now whosoever believe in him will not perish. Before, it was not so. But Jesus, it is now good because he now fulfilled his coming on earth. One thing is for somebody to be born. Another thing is for the person to have an assignment. Another thing also is for the person to complete the assignment. Jesus was born, Jesus was given an assignment, and Jesus completed the assignment. So the completion of the assignment is what has attached the nomenclature, good. And so let me say something now. No, as leaders, political, religious, opinion leaders and all that, I think people should be able to attach our existence on earth as good. When you are leaving an office as a civil servant, when you are retiring, people should be able to tag all your years of staying in that office as good. As a father, when you are leaving your children in your old age, they should be able to tag your coming to them as good. As a mother, as a leader. And so Jesus is now a very pivotal example for both Christians and non-Christians. And so that's why he's called good.
Okay, let me just bring in Venerable Otoke. What's your own perspective? Now, does good describe the crucifixion itself? Without good, does it make any meaning, or is it meaningless? Is it meaningless?
Thank you very much. The crucifixion, whether we say Good Friday or not, makes a lot of meaning. I will align myself with the speakers that spoke before me. Good in the sense that it is God's will. And whatever God does is good. You say all things work together for the benefit of those who trust in the Lord, not only trust, who are called according to his purpose. That's Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We can say good. That day, they didn't call it Good Friday because from human perspective, Jesus suffered and died. Not even many Jews believe that he died for their sin. They believe that he just offended the Roman Empire by calling himself a king, and he was crucified and he died. In actual fact, they thought that the Roman Empire killed him, but nobody killed Jesus. He surrendered his life. He said, I have the power to lay down my life and I have the power to take it up again. So in actual fact, he was not killed. He willingly died for the sin of the whole world, that whoever believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. So we say he is good because Jesus was able to go to the cross for us, that we may be redeemed from the shackles of sin. So it was later we added that Good Friday. In the Jewish culture, it is the Day of Atonement. So, but it's later the Christian will now say it's Good Friday because whatever Jesus did on that day is for our own good. Thank you.
Because of the underlying benefits.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
All right. Thanks a lot, Venerable Toki and the other men of God here in the studios. Let's go over to our Cardinal Network Center. The Reverend John Hayab, you've listened to the other comments. Let's have your own take on this, on the essence of Good Friday. And in doing that, maybe I should pose this question to you. It's also been referred to, just the entire life of Christ himself and how it ended on the cross as the one perfect sacrifice. Does that one perfect sacrifice lead us, therefore, to categorize today, when he was nailed to the cross, as Good Friday?
Thank you very much. Let me join my colleagues in saying that this day is celebrated with so many names. Some people call it the Silent Friday. Others call it the Black Friday. But as the last speaker did said, at a point, the Christian community, looking at what this unique sacrifice brought to humanity, call it Good Friday. But that has not stopped others from calling it the different Fridays and others that I have mentioned. So I wanted to lay this foundation so that the use of nomenclature of good is generally acceptable or is largely acceptable because what Jesus offered himself for, the sacrifice Jesus Christ made for, makes it good for we, the beneficiaries. Let's not forget that in history, people have made sacrifice, but most time they make sacrifice either for their families, they make sacrifices either for their friends or wife or husband, or children, or relations, or people, just few. But this unique sacrifice that is different from all other sacrifice in the face of the earth, was a sacrifice for the whole world. And that's why many Christians begin their presentation of this by using John 3:16. It's a familiar verse, but has a lot of meaning. For God so loved the world of sinners, the world of righteous, the world of rich people, the world of poor people, the world of people who go to church, the world of those who do not even know the road to the church. And he gave his only begotten Son, who came and died for us, so that whosoever will come and have everlasting life. So that is the most important thing. So this sacrifice is unique. This sacrifice is general. This sacrifice is large. This sacrifice is so big, if you can describe it. And Christians celebrate it. So when we attach good to it, we are looking at what this sacrifice brought. The Bible says, when we were yet sinners, Christ came and died for us. So he didn't die for us when things were good. He died for us when we were bad. That is why I love the subject of today's conversation, sacrifice for sustainable peace. As we go forward, we'll be looking at how do we make sacrifices for our country, for our family, and for sustainable peace, looking at Jesus' example. And Jesus, during that week of resurrection, death and resurrection, there were other unique sacrifices that were made, some for good, some for selfish purpose. If we look at them, probably it will help Nigerians to see the need for them to make sacrifices for this country, for their families, and for the common good of humanity, and it may change the way things have been going and lead us into a better future, a better and prosperous nation.
All right, thank you very much. We'll get back to you, Reverend Joseph Hayab. Let me return to Reverend Israel Akonje. I know you have just, limited time with us. But again, the essence of Easter, generally, not just Good Friday, it's for us to, renew our lives. It's for us to reconnect, with our faith. And one way we can do that as Christians is always to, let people know where this instruction, to commemorate this event, is located, is cited, is where we get the instruction from. And we have to refer to the Bible. Can you give us instances in the Bible, that speak specifically to Easter?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yes, there are instances in John chapter 1, verse 29, speaking about Jesus Christ, the very first time that he saw him, John said, "Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world." The Lamb of God. So Jesus, he already saw him as a lamb, as one whose mission was to give himself as a sacrifice. In the book of Isaiah chapter 53, we are told that he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. That all we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him, on Jesus Christ, the iniquity of us all. So Isaiah chapter 53, reading from verses 3 to 6, you find that there, John 1:29 says, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 15 says, "And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised." I think this is quite incisive. This is supposed to be the response to his death. He died that we should no longer live for ourselves. In other words, we should live for God. We should live for others. We should not live for our own self-centeredness, selfishness. We are supposed to live sacrificially the way he lived. So the purpose of his death is to give us a new life. The same 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17 says, "If anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. All things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." Therefore, the coming of Christ, the death is not just just for dying sake. It is to bring us into a newness of life, which is a life reconciled with God. That life is a life of love, it's a life of peace, and it is supposed to be shown and demonstrated in the way we show love to one another. All people of the country, men, women, young, old, educated, uneducated, Christians, Muslims, and people without religion, we are supposed to show them love, just like Christ came in the love of God to rescue us. And of course, when Jesus was even born, when he came into the world, he was said to be the Prince of Peace. And at his resurrection after the death, the first thing he declared to his disciples is, "Peace I live with you." In Nigeria today, we do not have the kind of peace we need. And this season is to remind us that the Prince of Peace came to reconcile us so that we will have peace with God and peace with one another. And so all this banditry, killing, rape, kidnapping, wickedness that is going on, terrorism, all these things are completely inimical to the purpose of Easter. Therefore, it's a call for us to live a newness of life that will be expressed in love, in joy, and in peace with one another.
Just before you go, Reverend, if in evaluating within the context of the essence of Easter, how would you evaluate the conduct of Christians over the years? Because this is an occasion we've been celebrating for God knows how many years now. So how would you now evaluate our conduct? Have we actually assimilated? Have we put to practice, the essence of this, the core of our faith?
Well, thank you very much. And that is why there is a continuous reminder, because, yes, to some extent, we try to respond to the Easter message, the coming of Jesus Christ, sober reflection, turning away from our sin. But mankind is very forgetful, and that's why Jesus, even around the Easter, he established the communion and said, "Do this in remembrance of me," because he wanted them to constantly remember. Mankind is very forgetful. We usually remember the things we should forget, and we forget the things we should remember. And what we should actually remember always is the death of Christ for us, and of course his resurrection too. And if we remember this, we will not want him to be crucified again. We will respond to God in the newness of life that is expected. So in terms of how we have performed, one does not really have a scale of evaluation, but I can say we are all work in progress, and whatever we have done, we should do more.
So what's your message today, just as you leave? What's your message? What will be
my message is that, like Paul will say, not that I have attained, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind, I press on. My message is for us to press on in the way of Christ, in his sacrificial manner. Remember Jesus, he gave everything, the Bible says, and he emptied himself, but God came to exalt him, and he has given him a name above all names. I want people to know that when they make sacrifice, it is not in vain. God himself will come to exalt you in his own way, and Jesus received back all that he gave. At the end of the day, you will lose nothing for living a sacrificial life for your family, for the nation, for wherever you are. And sacrificial life will also bring peace to all. So let us do this, and God's exaltation will come at the fullness of time to each one of us.
All right.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Israel Akonji of the Baptist Convention. We'd like to appreciate you for being with us.
Thank you
Quite
very much,
some very brief moment that you have spent, but very impactful. Thank you, and best of the Easter celebrations.
Thank you.
Now let's return to our other guests. I just want get some conceptual clarification, beginning with Venerable Oludare Otoke. We're discussing sacrifice, which Good Friday represents, the Easter period, what it represents. But you also find in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, that obedience is better than sacrifice. So, well, here we are exalting the virtue of sacrifice. How then do we find the conjunction between the admonition in the Old Testament that obedience is better than sacrifice, and then the one perfect sacrifice we now find in the New Testament in Jesus Christ. Okay. Venerable talking.
Thank you very much. I think the Reverend Akanji was able to say something earlier, that people sacrifice, some for good purpose, some for bad purpose. God is omniscient. He knows all. And when he gives instruction, he knows why he gives the instruction. Yes, obedience is better than sacrifice. Even obedience to God is a sacrifice. What is sacrifice? Sacrifice means giving up something you think is beneficial to you. Mark my word, you think is beneficial. At times it may not be beneficial, but you think it's beneficial. But sacrifice is giving it up. So when we say obedience is better than sacrifice, in the context of what we are discussing today, even when you talk of sacrifice, you talk of sacrifice according to God's will. If it's not according to God's will, it's not acceptable. Jesus Christ died on the cross according to God's will, according to what God has written concerning him. One of the things you will hear Jesus saying always is that the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. So obedience to God is much more higher than any sacrifice. But in the obedience, you see sacrifice there. For example, in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Apostle Paul was writing, he said, please, I beseech you by the mercy of God, that you present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So sacrifice, if it's not in obedience to God, is not acceptable. And another thing I want us to, and my viewers at home to hear is this. When we talk of sacrifice, when we talk of obedience, let us individually personalize it. Don't start to look at, that man sacrificed, that man did not sacrifice. Look at yourself. How am I faring in God's sight? So obedience to God is much more important than any sacrifice. God does not ask you. For example, now, Jesus died on the cross. God has not called me to go and die. That's the truth of the matter. If I now say I want to kill myself to satisfy God, that will be outside God's will. Because it's only God's will that is beneficial, that we get a reward from God. Thank you.
The Reverend Udochi, what's your take on this?
Yes, just like the Venerable has said, real obedience goes with sacrifice. There is no dichotomy between the two. If you are talking about obedience and it's not attached with sacrifice, it's a ruse. And you cannot also get sacrifice without obedience because it takes a real down-to-earth person to say, I let go of what gives me comfort in order to comfort another. You must leave your comfort zone in obedience and also in readiness to part with something that is very, very imperative for your own comfort, to comfort another. And so Jesus did that. Now, if you read the book of Philippians chapter 2 from verse 5 down to 9, he said, for God has highly exalted him and given him a name above all names. Before it was not so. Now, at the name of Jesus, every knee bows. Why? Because he was very obedient till death. How did the obedient got the lifting? He attached it with ultimate sacrifice. Look at our soldiers. Our armed forces men laying down their lives in sacrificing for the defense of this nation. That's what we talk about. That's what we are talking about. Obedience and sacrifice. They go together. Real obedience without sacrifice remains a ruse and is not complete. And that's what Jesus has done and has left us a legacy for everyone.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Reverend Odekanwa. Let's go to Kaduna. Reverend Joseph Hayab. Also, the question will be, to you, the same question. I just like for you to also let us know, is it possible to, divulge obedience from sacrifice? Because if you recall, somewhere in Mark, I think Mark 8 and Matthew as well, Matthew 20, it tells us that Jesus already told his disciples of the ordeal he was going to go through. So he already knew it was a mission, it was an assignment, it was an instruction that he had to obey. So in obeying that, in giving himself up, he was also obeying, a divine instruction. So which of the two virtues, should we really emphasize at this point in time or during this celebration?
Let me use the Old Testament you actually use in asking your question. The verse says, obedience is better than sacrifice, which simply means you have not made sacrifice if you made the sacrifice outside or in disobedience. It is not sacrifice. So if you are making sacrifice, make sacrifice with an obedient spirit. So the prophet was talking to the king about obeying. If you claim to have made sacrifice, don't forget that any sacrifice you do that is not from an obedient spirit is not sacrifice. And I like the way Reverend put it using the military. The military are people who are under instruction. The fact is that one of the key things in the military is obey before complain. In obedience, they are making sacrifices for us, making sacrifices to defend our territorial integrity, making sacrifices to make sure that we sleep or we live well. So you cannot separate obedience from sacrifice, but you cannot make sacrifice if you do not make it, and it becomes what's a worthy sacrifice if it is from a disobedient spirit. And Philippians did say that Jesus is our example of obedience, who obey till death. It is the obedience that makes his sacrifice of death a useful one. Do you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, in one of his prayers, he even asked, take this cup off me, but not my will, let thy will be done. In other words, I want to obey you, and I'm going to obey you. I will stand and obey you to make this sacrifice. When you claim to be making sacrifice, but not from obedience, then it is not sacrifice. There are examples of sacrifices people are making in today's world that is not from obedient spirit, and such sacrifice are not sacrifice. And that is what the essence we want people to know at Easter, that if you claim you are making sacrifice for God, is it in line with the will of God? Is it in obedience to the word of God? Is it in line with the plan and purposes of God for our country and for humanity? Don't say you are making sacrifices. Well, you are not. And I want to still come back to tell you that that particular verse you use, it wasn't the sacrifice we're talking here. It was a sacrifice of burning something that the then king did without waiting for the priest to permit him. And so the priest or the leader now had to remind him that, look, obedience is better than just saying, oh, I made a sacrifice, because there's an instruction that you should offer sacrifice of animal, and it is not your responsibility to offer the sacrifice. It is the responsibility of the priest to offer the sacrifice, but you want to show that, oh, let's just do sacrifice as long as the sacrifice first obey. If I walked into a bank now, as much as I may be a financial expert, an accountant, the man who sits on the counter as the cashier is the person I'm going to obey his instruction. If I don't sign the paper, I can get the money. Just because I am an accountant and I have knowledge of accounting, do not make me the cashier in the bank. So that's what the context that the priest was saying to the king at that time, that look, don't claim that you've made sacrifice. That sacrifice is not good enough since you do not obey the instruction that is pertaining to the sacrifice. So we want to say here that Nigerians, it's good to make sacrifice, but be sure that you are making the sacrifice in obedience to the will of God, in obedience to the word of God. And when we talk about sacrifice for sustainable peace, we know that it is the desire of God for peace to reign in a community. It even says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So if you are going to make sacrifice for the peace of Nigeria, you are already obeying an instruction of God.
The Reverend Hayab, thanks a lot. I just want to ask this question, based on what you said and based on what we know from biblical teachings. And the question, of course, first we're going to Venerable Turkey. At his moment of torment, Jesus himself said, let this pass over me. Why is sacrifice such a challenge to humanity?
Sacrifice such a challenge to humanity. At the time that Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass over me. That is humanity in operation. Do not forget that Jesus is total divine and total human. He's completely divine and completely human. When he said, Father, let this cup pass over me, his humanity was in operation. And we are talking of peace. Don't forget that peace, we say, is absence of conflict, absence of it, but it's more than that. It's even absence of an anticipation for conflict. When Jesus was saying this at the Garden of Gethsemane, he knew the seriousness of the sacrifice he's going to make. He knew how deep it is. The greatest sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross was to miss the presence of the Father. He was with the Father. He was God himself. He was with God. If you read John chapter 1 from verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with the Father, and all things were made by him, and nothing was made without him. But there is a process now going to the cross when he knew that he's going to carry the sin of the whole world. And God's eyes are too pure to behold iniquity. So he knew that as he goes to the cross, God is going to turn away his face from him. That is so tormentous. That's why he said that if it's possible, let this cup pass over me. When you talk of sacrifice, sacrifice is not an easy thing to make. We know that sacrifice are different levels. For example, you want to buy something, maybe you have 10,000 naira, or let's say 2,000 naira, you sacrifice, you give it out. You may not feel it as much, but you have been saving to buy something, maybe worth 100,000 naira, and they say you should give it out. That sacrifice is greater. Now, the greatest sacrifice is to give your own life. As human beings, we can give every other thing, but to give our life is a problem. And that is why God is demanding for obedience from us. Obedience, because going to the cross, the most tormentous aspect of going for the cross is that the Father turned away his face from Jesus. To the extent that Jesus looked up and said, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? And to show that truly God forsook Jesus on the cross. For 3 hours, there was darkness, which we now remember today by having 3-hour services and talking of the 7 words on the cross. Sacrifice is not an easy thing, and that is why it is demanded for by God. Not what you will want to do yourself, but please, anyone will do outside God's will is not acceptable to God. People of the world may call it sacrifice, but to God, it's not acceptable. To round it off, sacrifice is not easy.
All right. Just before we come back to Reverend Odikawa, Reverend Joseph Hayab, I wanted to follow up with this question just before Kingsley came in. People would ask, did the sacrifice, Jesus made, did it actually engender peace in his society? Because his followers, after he was crucified, after he passed, his followers, came under intense, persecution. Some of them were beheaded, others were killed in all sorts of manner. So did it actually engender the kind of peace, and how does that, resonate in our society today?
Well, Jesus himself said something very interesting in John 16, verse 33. He says, in this world you have many troubles, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. Jesus did make sacrifice for the peace of humanity, make sacrifice to unite humanity and God, make sacrifice to bring about peace and wholeness in the world. But you see, anything that is good will always have challenge. The devil will always challenge everything that is good, everything that comes from God, everything that will benefit humanity. I can't say this without quickly making a reference to the Garden of Eden. When God placed man, Adam and Eve, it was the plan of God for them to enjoy. It was the plan of God for them to live peacefully. It was the plan of God for them to marry all the time. But the devil comes in and disrupts that. So the devil is still at work even today, disrupting the peace of humanity, causing division among humanity. Not that sacrifice have not been made, but that is what the devil is. And how do we overcome the devil? We overcome the devil by holding tenaciously onto that which we have received from God through Jesus Christ and refuse what the devil is offering. Sometimes the devil offers this through our friends, he offers this through our neighbors, he offers this through followers, he offers this through leaders. He can offer and use any kind of human being to cause this lack of peace. It does not mean that there was no sacrifice. It simply means that as you present, as God provides what is good, the devil is there attacking what is good, and that is the story of Easter. Jesus Christ made a good sacrifice for the whole world. But there was a betrayal before the sacrifice was made. Judas, who had been following Jesus all through, betrayed Jesus. So in every good thing, there is a bad thing. But Jesus taught us something also within the period. Because when he went on the cross, or when he was carrying his cross, something happened. A man who had no business with Jesus was compelled, that is Simon the Cyrene, to carry the cross of Jesus. So in the mix of bad things, God will always bring someone to do something good. In the case of Simon the Cyrene, he was actually compelled, but the story of his life ended by saying that he ended up as a bishop. So sometimes people don't understand sacrifice at the onset, but as the going get on, they will come to appreciate. But there was also another very important person, Joseph the Arimathea. He was not even there, but he was part of the Sanhedrin. When he learned Jesus had died, he offered his very prestigious, rich, prepared grave, as it was done in the custom of that time, and sacrificed his grave for Jesus to be buried. That's to tell you that at Easter, there were so many instances of sacrifice. Jesus himself must sacrifice his life. Someone was compelled to sacrifice his business to carry Jesus' cross, but along the line, it turns his mind from being an ungodly to a godly person, and somebody willingly offered his grave. So I think the story of Easter teaches us so much about sacrifice, that in the mix of sacrifice, there may be challenges, there may be betrayal, as we saw in the life of Judas, but the sacrifice that is done for the larger good will always overcome. Remember, Judas never even enjoyed the 30 shekels he received. He ended up killing himself and threw the money away. So those who did those things that were good remain fresh in our minds today, and they are the examples we want Nigerians to learn, even as we celebrate Easter, as we celebrate Good Friday. But the man who did not make honest sacrifice, which was not from an obedient spirit, you saw how he ended.
All right, Reverend Hayab, thanks a lot. Let's come back to the Reverend Udochi. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Why is sacrifice such a big challenge to humanity?
Yes, just borrowing from what Reverend have just said. As I said before, sacrifice simply is defined as leaving your comfort zone, discomforting yourself in order to comfort someone who is discomforted already. That's number one. And sacrifice does not go without some of the social challenges. My first degree in the university was sociology. And we know very well that there is what we call peer pressure, peer groups. In the sociological settings, you will see some friends that will tell you, what are you trying to do? Why do you think you should give your car to this man? Even when you have the instinct to do that. Why do you think as a boss in the office, you should condescend so low in trying to sacrifice this or apologize to this junior staff? I mean, why will you be very stupid? Somebody will put it that way. Now, it's a peer pressure. They are coming against your emotional intelligence, trying to undermine you. And also in psychology, there is this man called Lombroso. He says, show me your friend and I will tell you whom you are. Jesus had supportive friends. In making sacrifice, you must also make sure you know the people surrounding you. They are very, very empirical to your survival. Very imperative. Now, when you read the book of Matthew, chapter number 27, from verse number 1 down to 3. The Bible says that when Jesus was about being crucified, the chief priests, the scribes, Judas Iscariot, they plotted to kill him. That is Matthew 27 from verse number 1. Now, why the chief priests? These are some of the societal, stratification of people that are seen in the society. I mean, because in the society you see so many stratificational cadre. The last is the apex of the cadre of the society. APEX as in Zenda. Now, these chief priests, they were in the apex. These were the people Jesus looked at as, oh, these are good people and all that. But they still plotted against him. They still came up against him. Why does he think he's the king of the Jews and he wants to, present himself as a Messiah and all that? I think we should kill him. He saw those people. Even a man who was his treasurer, Judas Iscariot, this man also ganged up to come to betray him. But Jesus forgave him. But their gang up never stopped Jesus not to have died for me and you. He pressed on. Now, what does that got to show us? Let us navigate a little bit from the Bible circle. Let's go to the society right now. Our leaders and even the led should be people who has a high resonation of emotional intelligence. In leading your people, in making sacrifice, you must have what we call emotional stamina to do that. Because somebody who is mentally retarded, who is not emotionally stable, cannot make sacrifice. And that's why sacrifice is very, very important for you when you are making sacrifice. Mind the type of company you keep and take the resolution and say, I'm going out for this, I'm not turning back. You must be somebody who is stable, not somebody who is waved about by every winds of doctrine. Now, Jesus had that emotional intelligence. He understood what his people wanted. He understood what God the Father wanted. And he understood his mission. Now, what are we trying to say? Why is sacrifice very challenging? Just like Brookings have said, it's challenging because of the peer pressures around you, the family settings, the sociological settings. Now, in sociology, that's what we call the agents of socialization. You talk about the family being the number one primary agent of socialization. Now, when you grow up in a family, it's very important for you to know that some family members will tell you, why are you trying to do that thing? Why do you want to, risk your life in joining the military? You want to defend the nation? You are the only son I have. Why will you die for this nation that doesn't even care for anybody that dies, in the course of duty? Look at the other man that died. They didn't do anything. And you say you want to die. You are my first son. You are my only child. But it behoves on that agent of the society, the son. He quotes right now to say, Mama, I think I'm poised towards making the sacrifice to unite Nigeria together. I'm saying, for instance, it's a metaphoric statement now. Now, what we are saying is that in sacrifice, we must have the emotional stamina. We must be resolute, committed to go out for what we want. If you are convinced about it, God have told you, despite of the peer pressure, we must stand. Jesus had that, and today all powers in heaven and on earth is given to him because he was determined to save humanity.
All right, Venerable Turkey, I know some people will say that to be able to make the kind of sacrifice that we're all talking about, you must be able to break the glass ceiling of the self, the ego. You must embark on a spiritual, deep spiritual journey. I don't know, you want to speak more on that?
Yes, thank you very much. When you talk of sacrifice, I mention it and I will keep on repeating. If it's outside God's will, it's not a sacrifice acceptable to God. To humanity, it may be a sacrifice. One thing we must know first is that God will never ask you to do something you cannot do. If God asks you for something, that means he has deposited that thing in you. But now sacrifice is becoming a big issue today because of the fallen nature of man. The fallen nature of man is egocentric. We always think of ourselves, what will it benefit me? What will it benefit me? Even when you are talking of sacrifice, many people are making sacrifices looking at what will be the benefit for me. At times, we make sacrifice because of ego. We say we do this, we do this, we do this for people to hail us. There is something going on in Christianity today. Let me use this opportunity to let me plead with my brethren. God asks us to do charity. When you do charity, and the money you are paying for publicity is even more than the money you are using for the charity, please watch out. God will never ask us to do what we cannot do. But the fallen nature of man, we always want to look at himself, at himself, at himself. And that is where the problem lies. Today, we make sacrifice out of obedience to God and, more importantly, love. There is that factor we must know. If you don't love somebody, you cannot sacrifice for that person. You cannot. And that is what I want us to imbibe in this nation. Let's love one another. Today we are talking of sacrifice for sustainable peace. Sustainable peace. Because when you look at the history of Nigeria, we have not enjoyed any sustainable peace. You may enjoy peace for some time, something else will come up, something else will come up, something else will come up. And we find ourselves where we are today. One, because it's difficult for people, both the leaders and the led, to make sacrifice. The led, we have a problem today. We cannot sacrifice to verify. When we hear any news, any article on our social media, we just jump into conclusion. No sacrifice. Yes, the leaders also, they need to make more sacrifice. And it's not just by mouth, show it. Sacrifice is an action, not just words, not in words, but in action. But I know it's very difficult to make sacrifice today. When you look at the biblical point of view, Jesus made that sacrifice. You asked a question earlier, which I wanted to respond to, that if we look at what Jesus did, can we say that his sacrifice has achieved the intended peace? I will say no, unless we want to deceive ourselves. No. But the issue is this. The peace that Jesus brought is an everlasting peace when he is allowed to reign. The sacrifice he made was a gift. And the process of gifting is not complete until that gift is accepted. This peace will come when we all accept Jesus Christ, first of all, as our Savior, that his death on the cross has saved us. Secondly, we accept him as Lord, that is, following his instruction. It may be difficult yet, yes, but his grace is sufficient for us. Thank you.
All right, Venerable, thank you very much. There are some of the issues that gentlemen you have raised. I would like Reverend John Hayab to also speak to this aspect. The Reverend Hayab, well, man is egocentric, and sacrifice entails self-denial or self-abnegation. But man, being egocentric, also is concerned about self-preservation. And the absence of peace threatens that self-preservation. And yet, we see at play the very opposites of self-denial in the level of greed and avarice in our society. How do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile the fact that we are egocentric and yet we are avaricious, we are greedy, but want to preserve ourselves, and the absence of peace engendered by our greed and avarice causes conflict in our society? Reverend Hayab, I would like you to chew on this as we take... All right, you're welcome back. It's still Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live from our Abuja headquarters studios on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're going back to our Kaduna Network Center, where I popped a question to the Reverend John Hayab. Reverend John Hayab, I believe that you remember the question in detail, and therefore you have your response. Otherwise, I could just recast the question.
Okay. Let me just go straight to attempt giving answers to your question, but start by, let's simplify this sacrifice. When we talk about sacrifice, there are many stages of sacrifice. There are many things we do that are sacrifice. Sometimes there are people who are making very serious sacrifice, very meaningful sacrifice, but we don't appreciate, we don't understand, we don't even give kudos to them, so they assume their sacrifice is not worth it. I think Jesus taught us something about sacrifice. When in the temple, people were coming forward to give offering, and one widow came and gave what is today called a widow's mite. And Jesus publicly said, oh, among all the givings here, this is the true giver, because she gave from her all. But the other ones, they have plenty, they have a miles, they just came to shop. So I think this is where Nigerians need to know that honestly there are people in this country that are making good sacrifices, that are making honest sacrifices, but because of who they are, the sacrifice do not look big, and sometimes we don't value them. Go to hospitals. Those who clean our hospitals is sacrifice for sustainable development. Those who make sure that certain things work around us is sacrifice. Those attendants. But you know, sometimes we speak about the big people, the big things, forgetting that if those people had not cleaned the hospitals or cleaned the ward, probably no one would have even slept there. So these are the things we must know. Because why do we have the issue of selfishness and greed, as you said? It's because the other person is just looking at sacrifice from the big thing. He's not looking at sacrifice from those tiny things that people are really contributing to society. So I want to encourage Nigerians that you can sacrifice if you are walking in a motor park. You can sacrifice as the cleaner on the street of Abuja, street of Kaduna, street of Kano, street of Lagos, street of Jos. You can sacrifice as just someone who probably is watching things happening and things are bad. Have you driven along the road, or you are standing by a road and there is something, an object that falls? That object could lead to the bursting of a next coming vehicle, and you are in position to remove that object from the road. You don't need to wait for another person to tell you to do that. You can do it. But in this country, people feel, oh, it's not my responsibility. Let me just don't go and try what people will accuse me or will start asking questions. And you know, we have developed such a doubting spirit among ourselves today in this country that even when you do what is good, people still doubt you, people still question the rationale behind what you are doing. But I think your conscience should decide and convince you that what you are doing is for good, is for common good, and is for the glory of God, and in obedience with the will of God, go ahead and do it. Those who do the show up, those who do the other one that is not true, that is their kind of sacrifice. And this is where we differentiate between obedient sacrifice and sacrifice for self-glory. If you do things just for self-glory, you have not helped. You have not made any sacrifice. Probably you walked into a gathering where no one can afford 1,000, and you want to claim that you give 200,000, but in reality, if you were to support that mission or that particular project, ₦1 million, 10 million, 20 million is not enough for it. Be honest to yourself, because you know sincerely in your heart that you could do that, and God is asking you to help. Have you observed that today in most of our televisions and radio, we receive information about people who are sick, people who are having problems in hospitals, they don't have money to go and get help, and no one seems to be forthcoming. And that's why the poverty seems to keep increasing. But these same people who do not forthcome to support those who are sick, to support those who are having problems, will go to certain functions and display that they have money, they display that they are donating and giving. Such giving is not because you really care. Such giving is not because you want to solve a problem. Such giving is just to impress. I'm giving all this illustration to bring us back to the issue we are discussing. What kind of sacrifice do we do for sustainable peace? And I want to say to Nigerians that, look, even the sacrifice of greeting could lead to peace. You have lived in an environment, you've made sacrifice to tell the other neighbor good morning. You feel too proud of yourself, too big. Oh, I am a northerner, and my neighbors are from the south. If I start greeting them, they will think that I am worshiping them. They will think that they are above me. Brother, you've not done enough. If you can humble yourself and open up a conversation by just saying, good morning, neighbor, I hope you're doing fine. How is your work? It will give him an opening and attract him to want to talk with you more. Such kind of neighbor cannot talk about fighting you tomorrow, destroying your home tomorrow, or coming against you tomorrow. I'm using this. What about the way we teach our children? What kind of sacrifice do we tell our children to do when they are in public place? They don't think that there is a need. If someone, or a child sees an old woman who cannot help herself, or an old old man, and he has not been trained to understand what it means to just give that old woman a helping hand. That may not mean anything, but let me tell you, that is part of how we are grooming our children to grow up and never assume or consider anybody as worthy of their support, as worthy of their assistance, as worthy of even giving him attention. When we don't make such tiny sacrifices around us, we are dividing and expanding our togetherness, because we are dividing ourselves. We are not bringing people closer, and tomorrow when there is an issue, the person you're supposed to stand in for, to give him, show him love, you'll be looking at him as an enemy. You'll be looking at him as someone you're supposed to kill. I deliberately brought the story of Simon the Cyrene and Joseph the Arimatheus to show that when we talk about sacrifice, not all sacrifice are to death. Some sacrifice are as minor. Though pastors have said it over and over that certain sacrifices that are not being instructed may not be. But Simon the Cyrene also gives us another picture of how God can change situation. Of a man who was not willing to take that cross, but was compelled to take that cross. But the compellation makes him realize and appreciate the goodness that came out with the cross, and eventually preach about the cross, promote the cross. There are certain sacrifices that sometimes we are not prepared for it, sometimes we are not willing for it, but as we start doing that, they will lead us to that bigger picture of sustainable peace.
Right, Reverend Joseph Hayab, thank you. Venerable, again, let's look at the, peace that we're talking about. Yes. And I like for you to explain to us, this is a very dicey period in our journey as a nation. It's been quite challenging, from every part, of the political zone. We're going through political, economic challenges, but the worst of it is insecurity. Yes. There's so much distrust, there's so much suspicion of one another. What kind of sacrifice would you expect from a Nigerian at this point in time?
Thank you very much. For sustainable peace and with what we are experiencing, we've talked of something that human beings were egocentric. The first sacrifice we need to make is to devour ourselves of self. Let us not consider ourselves first, but consider our neighbors first. Just as the last speaker said, if you are my neighbor, I'm your neighbor, we should start to think, how can we live together in harmony, rather than trying to outdo one another in one thing or the other. Now, talking of the state of the nation today, insecurity everywhere, if people are ready to make sacrifice outside Christianity now, let's say, okay, if I want to steal, I believe that I lack that thing, or it rightly belongs to me and it's not me, so I can steal it to get it. To make sacrifice, say that, okay, if I don't have it now, does it mean I cannot live? Now, this thing I want to go and do, can I live without it? That's the sacrifice we need to make now. Let's start from the government. The government needs to make sacrifice more than ever before now of securing the nation. And that's the truth of the matter. Coming to the religious circle, we need to make sacrifice today. Christians, Muslims, and so on, because you will discover that most of this insecurity, one of the precursors is religious. The reason is that if I see somebody be killed, you ask whether is he a Christian or a Muslim. My reaction now depends on what religious affiliation he has. That's very wrong. Secondly, we need to make sacrifice that, for example, I believe that without Jesus Christ, you are not saved. That's the truth of the matter. But at this time, if I preach to you and you say no, it doesn't cause any fight. We still move on. This is what you believe. Fine. This is what I believe. Fine. That doesn't mean we cannot still live together in harmony. We can still trade together. See what is happening in Kwara State now, for example, on the issue of hijab or no hijab and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of problems. Those people, have they not been living together before now? Have they not been going to different schools before now? Why suddenly there is a problem? The devil just used some people to create problem where there is no problem. We all need to make sacrifice. That's on the part of the government. I've talked of religions. Then individually, just like the last speaker said, we need to sacrifice. In fact, there are some things they are not even sacrifice, they are just service. Something, you see something that is not appropriate on the floor, you pick it. Sacrifice is level to level. Even in the traffic, you are a special road marshal, this FR said, you see hold up, even if you are in a hurry, because of that hold up, find somewhere appropriate to park, assist them in traffic control. Because I've discovered that thing in Nigeria, even in Abuja here, it just takes one man. When you get to any junction, just take one man to control the traffic and everything works. But if we are not ready to make sacrifice and we're always thinking of ourselves, there'll be a problem. They led also, today, fake news is the order of the day. Fake news is the order of the day. But first of all, make sacrifice of finding out what's the source of that news. Being a pastor, I have a large social media. My people post any kind of things. When I see such a thing, I will ask, where did you get it? Say, somebody forwarded it to me. I say, okay, the person that forwarded it to you, did you confirm from him where I got it? He say, no. I say, then don't forward it if you are not sure of the source and are not sure of the facts. That's the number one sacrifice we need to make. 2, it's easier to lie than to tell the truth because of our fallen nature. Let's make a sacrifice of saying the truth we know. Not only saying the truth we know, but saying it in love. Because that's what the Bible commanded us. It says, say the truth in love. Not the truth in anger, not the truth that will spark another problem. Because many times we say things, for example, we are talking of vaccine now, COVID-19 vaccine. I found a lot. Okay, the president came out on TV that he got his own. Somebody said, are we sure it's COVID-19? It's actually the vaccine that is not empty syringe. Do you have an alternative information telling you that it's not the real vaccine? If you don't have that, why are you putting doubt in the minds of people? And it takes sacrifice to change our ways. Because if we don't change our ways, there can be no peace in this country. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, Venerable Toki. I know you're talking about the elements of sacrifice. Sacrifice of time, yes. Sacrifice of knowledge, sacrifice of resource, and sacrifice of labor. These are some of the elements in sacrifice. But back to the Reverend Udochi. In your opinion, what ways can we further exploit for sacrifice towards the ends of sustainable peace in our country?
Thank you so much. Sacrifice, as I've always defined, maintaining the peace of another in order to discomfort yourself at a particular instance or level. I will be taking your question from the angle of types of sacrifice. When you talk about sacrifice, we have to break it down. We have to break it down so that a layman will understand and it doesn't become very ambiguous for somebody to say, these are pastors speaking now. But let them also see that these are informations being dished out. Not that pastors are speaking on an Easter something or something, but this is some of the things, norms that will help our society. If you talk about sacrifice without making it your culture, culture is a way of life, according to Taco Passing 1992, a way of life of a particular set of people. The way they reason, the way they dress, and the way they act. And so when we come in this nation, so many people have the opinion Nigeria is a corrupt nation, but I'm not of that opinion. In every 12, you must have a Judas. It doesn't mean you are using a hypothetical statement to generalize the whole citizen of this nation. And what we are going to do in that is to make sure we prove our neighbors, we prove the skeptics wrong, we prove everybody around us, even in the international community. How? Number one, going into the times of sacrifice, that Jesus came to stand as a symbolic reasoning opinion to lots of people. Number one is what we call truth sacrifice. Truth sacrifice in the sense something happened here now, and there is an inquiry. Who did this? Everybody say, I'm not the one. But it takes a man of sacrifice. It takes a man of character to say, I'm the one. Or, I saw with my eyes, this is the person. That's number one. Because in sacrificing, you must bring down your ego. Allow your ED to do the work. ID. You must allow your self-ego and what people will say to get down. You see, you ask the question, Brookies, you said, why is it difficult for people to sacrifice? And I made a statement of peer pressure. I made a statement of socialization. The people you have around you can socialize you into becoming a fraudster, into becoming, a parasite even. Somebody who is very lazy, you just base on people. You want leaders to sacrifice your food, sacrifice the shoe you are going to wear, sacrifice everything. Even how you are going to sleep with your wife, you want them to sacrifice about it. Everybody say, Mr. President, you must do this. Oh, very fantastic. Leaders are voted, to take care of the land. But we must know also that there are so many things we will start behaviorally as individuals. We're having it as a cradle of culture to imbibe in our lives in helping the nation, the society, and helping the leaders.
You've talked about sacrifice of truth. We're running out of time.
All right. Now, to lead well. Now, the sacrifice of truth, you must stand on truth at all times. And also the sacrifice of contentment. You just have to be contented with what you have and don't go after looting and looting, because vanity upon vanity, everything is vanity. And the last one I would like to say before we round up is the sacrifice of help. Now, it's different from sacrifice. You go to help, you look for the destitute, you look for the downtrodden. Go to the rural areas. There are people who cannot eat. They only drink water to go to bed. They can't sacrifice.
In just few words.
Yes.
What kind of sacrifice, with regards to insecurity, what kind of sacrifice would, let's say, not Nigerians or Christians, make at this point in time?
It's just a sacrifice of truth. The sacrifice of truth. And I repeat again, the sacrifice of truth. Just stand on the truth. Don't do whatever that is false. Don't engage yourself in anything that will undermine your neighbor's reputation. Deliberately. Or the nation, or the people in power because you are not in power. Or the people out of power because they are out of power. You just have to stand on the truth. Christians and non-Christians. Jesus stood for truth. He stood for sacrifice. He spoke the truth even when his own people betrayed him. And so we must be poised into speaking the truth, going for what we want to the glory of God, even when people around us seems to be against us.
All right, thank you very much. The Reverend John Hayab, this question is coming to you. Well, we've had peer pressure, and here we are. It's possible that on the basis of the admonition that has been emphasized today, and of course had always been emphasized with regard to sacrifice for sustainable peace, some persons will say, yes, I need to make this sacrifice, and I will go ahead making this sacrifice. But you look around you and you find that some other persons are not making a sacrifice. If anything, they are jeering at you. How do you, as that individual who is making that sacrifice, keep pressing ahead?
The truth about it is that if we want to see our sacrifice make an impact, then look at it from you. If all other people will not do right, don't join them to do wrong. You one. You see, one person doing right in a community can influence the larger other people to do right. So if one person here do right, another one person in another place do right, so we are adding to the number of people doing right and we are increasing. But if you are waiting until everybody starts to do what should be done, then no one is going to do it because someone probably out there is also looking up to you. I wanted to chip in this by talking about 3 important sacrifices in a just quick time. One, we must sacrifice to forgive. It takes sacrifice to forgive those who have wronged you. Many of us cannot forgive those who have wronged us. That is not good sacrifice. Yes, of course, you have to be hurt when you are wrong, but sacrifice and forgive. Another thing is that it takes sacrifice to love. One pastor has said that severally, and I want us to remember this. Nigerians, sometimes it's not easy for you to love people you don't know. It's not easy for you to love people that you've heard so many bad things about them. But when you sacrifice to love them, even despite the bad stories you've heard about them, we can sustain peace. And the other thing is, it takes sacrifice to support and assist people. I don't see someone who has invested or has supported some people to grow will go back again to destroy what he has done. So if we learn to sacrifice and forgive one another, sacrifice and love one another, sacrifice and support people, not necessarily people of our faith or people of our tribe or people from our region, then we are now beginning to build a new community of close connection. You love the other person, you care about the other person, you understand he hurt you yesterday, but you have forgiven him. You understand he didn't do what you liked the other day, but you understand he's human and you're forgiving him, and then you keep working together, then the society will change. Now children will learn. Those who may not belong to your faith will learn from that act. Those who do not belong to your tribe may even see it as the culture of your people to always make things easy. Yes, you're offended, but you forgive. I think that is what Jesus Christ passed on to us, and we must pass it on continuously in this country until we see the desired change that we are looking forward to happens in our country.
Honorable John Joseph Hayab, thank you. And just before we come back to you to take, of course, say our goodbyes. All right, we've run out of time actually. So let me quickly appreciate you, Reverend John Joseph Hayab, Country Director, Global Peace Foundation, joining us, of course, from our Kaduna Network Center. Thank you very much, and do have a fruitful Easter celebration.